Okay, so this reads from an XML file, which is great, sort of. I did play a little bit during the break with Reen's help trying to figure out if we could get this to read from the raw data file, and I could get it to compile, but I couldn't get it to read. I tried to get raw resources and told it which one to go get, and it must treat those raw resources as more bits and then turn them into characters versus the XML, which comes across as XML characters, so that wasn't working for me. So now what I want to do, now that I've got my array all set up, is I want to write it back out again. But there is no routine, just like, if you think about it, there is no routine that reads XML, right? It reads tags, but I have to know the structure of the tags. I have to know sort of the order that they're coming in. I have to know who's doubles, who's integers, who's string. I have to know that, and I had to write all this code to process each XML piece myself. There's nothing out there that says, here's an XML file, figure out what all the field names are, and figure out what the record names are, and figure all that stuff, and suck it all in, and give me an array with this name that's got all that stuff inside. Build me a class, basically, out of it. It would be so generic, it would be huge, and nobody would ever want to use it. So if we want to write these out, we have the same problem. There is no file out there. There is no command, no class that allows me to write DVD records to a file. So my first thought is, I need to change my DVD class so that it can do it. Why don't I add to my DVD class a public string to XML method that takes all my data and turns it into an XML record. Now, looking at the XML record, again, I'm going to try to bring it up on that one, on the bottom of the screen. Looking at my XML record, my toXML method is going to have to take care of this and these and the data inside. But if I write it, I only have to write it once. And then whenever I have a DVD, I can tell it to turn itself into an XML representation of that record. So in here, I would do something like this. I would create a string, and I could use the string builder, but I don't think this is going to be that big. So I'm just going to create a string result and make it equal to the empty string.
Would you just start it out as table DVD?
I could do that. Good point. And I could save myself a step. And I can even put the \n in there. Why the \n? So if I do get it into a file, I can see these on separate lines. Let's put the \n in there. And then I want to add the DVD tag. So result plus equals, can I do that? I think so. The DVD ID tag concatenated to my DVD ID field value concatenated to the n tag. And a \n. And then just keep doing that, right? For every single field. The only ones I have to be careful of is I got to look at my constructor here, because I think in my constructor I said if I get an empty constructor, everybody's null. Uh-oh. If everybody's null, I better not try to concatenate null to a string, because the answer is always null. It's like a black hole. I think we talked about that many, many months ago now. At least it feels like it. So I have two choices. I could either change all these nulls into empty strings, because most of these are strings, or inside these, I could say, because even the DVD ID is null. Here I could put in an inline if I can remember how to do that. Getting too old to teach this class, I'm telling you.
Starts with parentheses, I think.
Yeah, let's go look it up. Should be in the basic syntax, if statements, if condition, if hours, there it is. Parentheses, question mark, value, colon, value. Okay, so I could do something like parentheses, DVD ID equals null. Then give me the empty, no, give me 0, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. DVD ID should never be null. It's where it started. But we never messed with any of them, so we'll just put a 0 in there. Otherwise, give me the DVD ID. And that whole thing probably needs parentheses now just to make it quiet. Okay. So that's how I can handle the nulls. And let's do a few more. I think I could probably steal this and copy it over and over and over again. So why not take the whole line, dummy? Paste, change this to title, change this to title.
It should not be 0, it should be
Right.
an empty string.
Or missing or something like that. And again, I'm cheating. I did handle category, so I can do that. And so now what I'm manually doing, whoops, is creating an XML tag for this.
It's not plural.
But this is part of my class. So now whenever I want to write that, in the main activity, for instance, where you got that before I move on? In the interest of time, I'm going to move on. If you're having trouble keeping up, I apologize, but we're running out of time here. And I'm going to do here another public save DVDs. And then I can do something like for int d equals 0 as long as d is less than. DVD list dot DVDs dot count or size. And I might be able to use a for each loop there, but I'm on a roll. Stick with it. And then I might be able to do something, and I have to look at the syntax for this in just a second, but here I might do something like write, which is not going to be syntactically correct, but DVD list dot DVDs dot get parentheses D. That gives me the DVD off the list, whichever one I'm on, and then convert it to an XML. Getting syntax errors only because the right part isn't correct yet. So this says go into the array. There's my array. Remember, that's the full name of the array. Go into the array, get me the third one, and convert it to XML. And then write that out to a file someplace. And then in the for loop, go get the next one. Karen?
Could you also put that method on DVD list? Because that's what it's
Potentially. Her suggestion is, could I put, you mean the method to write the entire array out to a file? This method. Yeah. Maybe. Is that part of a list's job? Maybe. I mean, which methods you put into what classes where is an art all of its own. You know, Karen's suggesting that maybe this belongs in my DVD list class.
Of course, if you do that, then you have to put the load in there also.
I have to put the what?
The read in there also.
Potentially, yeah. Then the read might go in there, and it maybe. Or no. Because really that's I/O, right? Because we're writing to a file. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't I/O classes that do I/O to files and all kinds of stuff, like pull parser. There are classes that do that. We learned about business classes, at least in Programming Logic Intermediate, and here we said it doesn't do I/O. That's a general guideline. So how do we write it? Well, that's a problem. Let's do a little research during the break, and I mean a little. And the first thing I found is you shouldn't write to resource files. They're supposed to be files that are fixed when you compile. Because your resource files, and Matt, I have to apologize, he asked me if I could send him that little game that I showed you a couple of weeks ago. I think I showed it to you. I don't know if I ever got it to work, or at least I talked about it, my counting game for my granddaughter. But all I really need to send to him is the APK file. It's the compiled version of an Android program. So somewhere in this pile of stuff here, there's an APK file. And if you want to share this program with your friends, you give it to them and they find some way to get it onto their app or onto their device and they can run your program. Well, those resource files, my XML files, my images, my colors, my strings, my styles, all those resource files are part of that APK. And if it's embedded inside of that file, how are you going to write to it? Okay, so what am I supposed to do, oh guru Stack Overflow? First of all, you could write this, you could steal this little routine here. So, okay, I'll steal that routine. Let's see how nicely it goes into my Java. So you go away. Okay, that seemed to work okay. I don't have a tag, so that's just a log file. I'll put Voker in there. Okay, and it's putting out the message, and then there's a writer that writes out stuff. So this is a very handy little utility to write to a file. You tell it the name of the file that you want, what kind of encoding you want, and then the text that you want written to that file. Well, the text I already have, right? I can pull that. So this gets a buffered writer, does a stream writer, sticks it all together. Big, I don't even care how it works. This guy says it works, so I'm going to trust him. It's going to write to a file. But he is telling me that I should be writing to an external file on the SD card. What? Could write it to the SD card. Or you could write to an internal file that only your program can see. The next question I have is, that's all great. I could write to one of those, but can I read to one of those and turn it into XML somehow? Because that's really what I want to do.
I found you can use the parser and you can input from a IO stream,
From an IO stream instead.
which is
Okay.
basically what you're doing. You're writing an IO stream.
It's all built into the other. So there is a way to do it. I think it's beyond the scope of what I want you to do here. What I would like you to do, and I'll play with this a little bit, and if I have some time, I'll email you and tell you that there'll be a little mini lecture to see if I can get this to work, and Reen's suggestion of the stream, and see if I can get all this to work, and I'll share it with you, but I'm not going to require you to do it in Unit 9. What I'm going to ask you to do in Unit 9 is pretty much the same thing that I did in this example. You already have a class. And what did I just trash? Left extra line. You already have a class. Create the list externally so that you can share it between your two routines. And by the way, when you change data, I still want it to come back. It's just not going to be a permanent save. You should be able to, in your second detail activity, this is Unit 8 for those of you who haven't started yet, you click on see if this still runs, you click on a DVD, it takes you to the detail screen. The user gets to edit what's in the detail screen. Unit 8 asks you, I think, to, yes, save that, and then go back to the main screen. Save it where? In the array. Replace it in the array. You know where you're at. Replace it in the array. So you take the data off the screen, you put it in the array, and then you go back to the main screen. And you should see, when you go back, and yes, I've made this work, you should see when you go back in your list the changed data. So if you, it depends on what you're showing in your birthday list, for instance, it might include the person's name and a gift, or whatever, I forget what that, or the birth date. If you change the date to a different year, it should show up in the list that way. And there's a slight, it's not a trick, there's a slight thing you have to do there to make that happen. So I still want you to do that. I still want you to read from an XML file. So you're going to have to create an XML file with your 10 records that you can read. And I think I would like you to write the 2XML function that I wrote in the business class, just so you have it handy and keep that as a tool. So no, you don't have to write it so that it's permanent. But as long as your program is still running, and today on many devices, there's so much memory on these things nowadays, it might stay there forever. I don't know about forever, but for a long time, until you power down, it'll remember that list. And if I can, I'll try to get the rest of this sorted out and share it with you and share the app with you so that you can have it for future reference for those of you who really want to use your Christmas list and birthday list for real applications in the future. The next phase, if we had more time, would be to take a look at SQLite. SQLite is the database program that is accessible to Android and iOS devices. And it's an actual database program. And you can query it and do all the stuff you do with databases. That would be the next phase, the more logical phase, instead of trying to save these in an XML file, to save them in a database and just suck them out of the database whenever you need them. It makes even more sense. We don't have time for that. So I said it very fast. I will document what I want you to do in Unit 9. But I think your Unit 8 should still work the way it is. Just my grand plan of you saving this birthday list, Christmas list to your device is not working because, will not work because of that one lovely statement that we just saw here that, hey, dummy, you can't write, or you shouldn't write to resource files. The fun part of these, and if I remember right from when I took the intermediate Android class a long time ago, the fun part of these is finding them. Where do they hide? If I'm looking in here, how do I look in here to see that actual file, to see if it looks like what I want it to look like? Exactly. And it's hard to do some debugging. Why isn't this working? Well, what's inside my file? What's wrong with my XML? Maybe you mistyped something. You can't tell unless you can find the file itself and open it up. And it is possible, it's just not real easy to do. So we'll save that for the intermediate Android class, which none of you are scheduled to take. I have gotten a couple of emails. There was a mistake in the scheduling software that made intermediate mobile a 4-credit class. It's not. I've submitted the paperwork to change it to a 3-credit class. So your bill will also adjust. And it will be, just so we're clear, an beginning iOS class. It's called intermediate mobile. Could be called mobile 2. Doesn't matter what we call it. It's what we put inside it. And considering the resources we have available, you're in good shape. I asked Sean if he wanted to teach it as an intermediate Android class, and he said, I could, but he really thinks, and as a hiring manager, I'm going to take his word for it here, he really thinks that you should have iOS background and Swift background on your resume. He says that when they post new, he works for eSpay, and they do a lot of, he's one of their iOS developers and Android developer. He says when they do a posting for a job, for every iOS programmer, they get 7 Android programmers. And so if we're really looking for iOS, having both on your resume, I think would be very valuable. And he said having iOS, if you want to do this kind of programming, is going to be very valuable. So we'll switch that course over and make it a beginning iOS class. So you can learn Swift, and that's the language. It's not used for iOS programming, brand new language created last year. Took a little longer than that, but released last year. Gave us all kinds of headaches.
At least it shouldn't be changing.
Shouldn't be changing quite as much as it was then. So that's the plan. Any other questions for the recording? Again, I'll put the Unit 9 assignment up there very shortly, probably tomorrow sometime, and make sure I can write it.